At the auction, my mother glanced right past me and whispered to her friends, "She's just here to clean." Their laughter echoed around me, unaware that the $4.2 million painting they were obsessing over was mine. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me. But when I stepped forward with undeniable proof, the room fell utterly silent. Have you ever seen people realize their entire status was built on a lie? Stay with me, because what happened next shattered everything. I remember the sharp crunch of snow under my boots that cold February night in Zurich, the kind of cold that seeps through every layer no matter how tightly you button your coat. I wore a midnight blue wool dress I'd sewn myself, simple yet deliberate, just enough to say, I came prepared. Zurich's elite made you feel like you didn't belong unless you wore diamonds or carried a prestigious last name, something mine no longer held. At the Gustad auction house entrance, the glass doors mirrored a parade of privilege. Sleek town cars, women in heels worth more than my rent, their practiced laughter filling the air like a weapon. I walked alone, clutching a worn black purse that still smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, a keepsake from a humble past in Asheville. The check-in clerk barely glanced at me when I gave my name, Raylan Quinn, then frowned, scanning his list. "No one by that name," he said dismissively. I showed him the encrypted QR code invitation on my phone. Only then did he grudgingly wave me through with a cold, thin smile, as if I'd wandered inside by mistake. Inside, the warmth hit me, but it was sterile. Marble floors gleaming beneath my boots, chandeliers scattering fractured rainbows on walls heavy with old money and new perfume. Voices floated in French, German, clipped English. People draped in velvet and satin whispered. Names like Currency, Beja, Warhol, O'Keeffe. I tried to disappear into the shadows. My mother used to say, "These places are for real people, Ray, not dreamers with paint-stained fingers." Before she could spot me, I saw Valora, my mother, laughing with a small circle of impeccably dressed acquaintances, while Callista, my sister, stood nearby, her blonde waves perfect, voice sharp and loud enough to command the room. I looked away before she caught sight of me, but I hadn't come for them. I was here for the centerpiece, the Veil of Dawn, a painting that had captivated whispers for weeks, valued at over $4 million, supposedly by a reclusive European master. I approached it steadily, heels clicking against cold stone, and that's when I passed them again. Valora, mid-laugh, nodded toward me. "Isn't that your daughter?" one man asked. She sneered, "She's just here to clean. Maybe sweep up after the showing." Another chuckled, "The help has taste now." The polite laughter rolled over me like a wave I refused to let break me. I tightened my grip on the clutch until it bit into my palm. The gallery beyond grew quieter. The lights dimmed, focusing like spotlights on the prized pieces. Veil of Dawn hung alone, framed in gold leaf, its blues and ochres bleeding like a sunrise through fog. I moved closer, heart steady, and read the plaque, "Artist unknown." My name was gone. I had painted it over a year ago in a dusty back room, behind a secondhand bookstore, with donated materials and the grief of a decade layered in every stroke. Now it hung, priceless yet nameless, stripped of the only name that mattered. A woman wrapped in feathers whispered nearby about the mysterious artist in hiding. I said nothing, just watched her snap a photo, unaware she stood next to the creator. I retreated to a cold bench in the shadows, nameless like the canvas, the bitter chill seeping into my emerald green dress, a dress my sister had generously lent me. The auction lights dimmed further, and then I heard Callista's voice, sharp and incredulous, slicing through the murmurs. "That can't be who?" "I think it is." Her words dropped like glass on marble, and a high-pitched laugh followed, full of cruel knowing. A man in a black vest appeared, polite but cold, telling me there'd been a seating mix-up and escorting me to a folding chair wedged behind a plant near the service door. A place without a name card or welcome, just the dull buzz of catering. Trays and the reflection of a dimly warped ghost in the brass restroom sign nearby. From the shadows came whispers, "Who is she? Staff. She has no name tag." The word struck me harder than I expected, and though I tried to smile, it slipped away before it reached my eyes. I smoothed the fabric of the emerald dress I'd worn as a peace offering. 2 nights earlier, Callista had barged into the Airbnb I rented, holding a garment bag and a bottle of wine. You didn't have anything formal, she said, dropping them like a test. This might help you blend in. Tasteful, right? She never waited for a response, never cared for mine. The dress fit well enough, elegant and restrained, but now I knew it wasn't kindness, it was bait. She swept past me, shimmering in emerald silk, heels clicking with purpose, her friends laughing nearby. Oh my God, she actually wore it. Callista's smile was sharp, her head tilted, loud enough for everyone to hear, and in that moment, I understood I was not invited to join their world. I was their entertainment, their ghost, the unpaid help, the erased artist behind the masterpiece they flaunted as their own. I glanced down at the cuff. There it was, a faint beige smudge near the seam, unmistakably foundation, probably hers. She'd worn this dress before, used it, discarded it like a costume handed off to someone playing a part beneath her, a disposable thing, something you toss aside when you're done pretending to care. I sat still, no trembling, no tears, just a cold, steady silence. But I stopped meeting anyone's eyes, stopped straightening my posture, and my breaths grew shallow and slow. My fingers clenched tighter around the worn clutch resting on my lap, the same clutch I'd carried to every job interview, every exhibit, every opening where I was only ever invited to observe, never to belong. Around me, the crowd buzzed louder, more alive, and somewhere near the front. A cork popped, the soft hiss of champagne slicing through the fog in my mind. I remained frozen, not by the chair shoved next to the restroom, not by the threadbare dress, but by the brutal, final realization that nothing I had done, nothing I had become, had altered how they saw me. Not as an artist, not as a woman, and certainly not as family. Then, as the auction lights dimmed for the opening bid, I shifted just enough to peek past the floral partition and caught sight of a gilded frame near the entrance, mounted above the welcome table beside the list of contributors. My heart skipped, because I knew that photo, though not the way it appeared now. The electric hum faded to a hush as the lights softened. I rose silently, heels silent on marble, weaving through indifferent eyes as if I were air. The frame was antique gold, heavy with intention. The caption beneath read, Santa Summer 2014, a legacy of art and family. I stepped closer and the memory crashed down, New Mexico's Earthlight, the adobe villa, that week when I painted Veil of Dawn, clutching my easel smeared with ochre and blue. I'd smiled then, reluctant but real. I belonged to that moment, yet in the photo, I wasn't there. The corner of an easel peeked in, and just barely visible was my hand. Only my hand. The rest of me was cut out so cleanly it was impossible to mistake it for an accident. My throat seized. This wasn't oversight. It was deliberate erasure. You don't erase a person from a family portrait by mistake. You do it to rewrite the story, to delete the inconvenient truth. I stared at that. Ghost hand, finally understanding. They hadn't forgotten me. They had rewritten history and left me out on purpose. I was always optional to them, a blemish they could excise when I spoiled the picture. I stepped back and turned away, the auctioneer's voice rising as the room fell silent. But I didn't return to my invisible seat. Instead, I walked steadily, toward the center, toward Veil of Dawn itself, bathed in a gentle spotlight. From here, the colors seemed to breathe, golden swirls tangled with turbulent blues, like a storm caught in sunrise, a fragile piece demanding more than admiration. Nearby, a man in a velvet jacket whispered about a $20 million price tag, scoffed at the painting's chaotic strokes, mocking it as the work of a toddler or a madwoman. I tightened my grip, sinking deeper into the quiet, knowing no one here understood the truth behind those colors. Then came Callista's voice, sharp, cutting, as always, brushing past the painting with laughter, champagne in hand, surrounded by her sycophants. It's good, she sneered, her generosity laced with cruelty. The artist was probably unstable. The laughter that followed was soft, but cruel, the kind that echoed in bone. I didn't move, but inside, something ignited, a fierce clarity. These people weren't here for art. They were here to collect egos and price tags like trophies. Veil of Dawn was nothing but a spectacle to them, a currency to be flaunted. But what stung deepest wasn't the stranger's mockery. It was my family's smiling faces in that photo without me, standing before my truth and laughing, utterly blind to how they were laughing at me. I should have fled, slipped behind that divider, returned to my forgotten chair by the restroom, and waited for the nightmare to end. But I stayed, rooted by the painting, by the ghost of the girl who had poured her soul into it, barefoot and alone on a dusty patio in Santa Fe, seeking to understand the silence her family always gave her. Then, louder this time, Callista's voice cut through the room. "Whoever made this," she said with a cruel laugh, "needs help, not a gallery." My back stiffened, but I didn't turn. Her voice, sharp and mocking, carried like a blade, and I knew the half-smile she wore, the smile of someone who knew she'd landed a perfect blow no one else saw coming. The lights flickered once, twice, then went dark as the auctioneer took the stage and the crowd quieted. I slipped away from Veil of Dawn's glow and melted into the shadows again, moving like I had my whole life at family gatherings, present, but never truly seen. My chair behind the floral screen remained empty, unnoticed, as the auctioneer's voice cut through the silence with a crisp Swiss accent. "Before we begin tonight's extraordinary bidding on Veil of Dawn, we'd like to invite a special guest to say a few words, someone deeply connected to the artist's journey." I blinked, the words slicing through me like ice. No one had been connected to my journey, not since that lonely summer when I painted it surrounded only by strangers at the women's shelter in Santa Fe. Then I saw her, Callista, rising from the front row, her emerald dress shimmering under the harsh gallery lights, not the worn-out one she had thrust into my hands just 2 nights ago, the one I was now drenched in sweat wearing, but a sleek, modernized version, sharp and flawless, as if tailored for the spotlight she seemed born to claim. The room offered polite applause as she took the microphone, her voice soft, deliberate, every word measured like a carefully crafted weapon. "This piece," she began, sweeping a hand toward the canvas behind her, "was born from deep pain and healing. I had the honor of standing beside the artist in one of her darkest hours." The audience fell silent, captivated by the story she wove. I watched, my breath caught, as she spun a narrative of struggle and transformation, grief made motion, loss given form, Veil of Dawn, the emblem of survival. But Callista never knew the true cost of that season, never called, never visited the shelter, never asked where I disappeared to when I fled the family's summer rental with nothing but a duffel bag and a threadbare hope. She was never there while I painted until my fingers bled, borrowing brushes under a flickering fluorescent light. Yet now here she was, standing tall, speaking as if she had midwifed this creation herself, introducing it like her own child. "They say art is survival," she declared, "but I say it is proof of love, of sisterhood." My nails dug into my palm, a scream caught in my throat, torn between rage and invisibility. What was worse, the theft of my work or the theft of the grief that birthed it? They hadn't just erased my presence, they stole my voice, handing it over to someone who never whispered a word of the struggle. The crowd's applause swelled, first tentative, then overwhelming. I turned away slowly, stepping back into the shadows, weaving past quiet murmurs and tilted heads as the auctioneer returned to his post. Callista smiled graciously as she descended, triumphant in a battle only she understood. I couldn't let this farce continue. I edged toward the gallery's perimeter, spotting a young woman in black with a headset, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," I said, steadying my voice. "Callista didn't paint that piece. I did." She blinked, confusion flickering before she checked her list. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, voice tight. "But that painting, Veil of Dawn, it's mine." She smiled, professional but dismissive. "You'll want to speak to the event coordinator. I'm just handling seating." I nodded, swallowing my frustration, and moved toward another staffer near the drinks table, a man in his 30s scanning badges. "I need to talk to someone in charge," I told him. "That painting was misrepresented." He paused, then shrugged. "If you have ownership issues, take it up after the event, maybe with a lawyer." As I turned, a guest muttered to his companion, "They let anyone claim genius these days." The words hit like a punch to the ribs. I stopped dead. In the hallway, heart pounding in my ears, the dress choking at my neck, my throat raw, but no tears came. I didn't cry anymore. Not for them. I almost left, already imagining the sharp bite of snow beneath my boots, the cold truth I could hold on to. Then a voice, Raylene's, came from behind me, shaky and older, not Callista's or any familiar. Guessed I'd memorized. I turned, expecting a curator or a mistaken guest, but instead there stood an elderly man. Tall, wiry, kind eyes behind thick glasses, his coat decades out of fashion, hands trembling as he clutched a folded scarf. "You don't remember me," he said, voice gravelly but gentle, "but I knew Jacques Langdon, your mentor." The name fell like warm water on frozen glass. Jacques. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud since the week he died, before I ever had the courage to show him the finished piece. I nodded, unsure whether to speak or simply let the moment linger. "I'm Elliot," he said softly. "Jacques' assistant. Sometimes just the guy who brought him coffee. He talked about you." Before I could answer, a young woman in black stepped forward, clipboard in hand, her smile practiced and firm. "Sorry, miss, you're not on the clearance list, please. Come with me." I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came. Elliot looked uncertain. "They're moving us to the overflow lounge," she said. "We've reached capacity." She didn't wait for a response. I followed silently, Elliot trailing behind. The overflow lounge was a narrow conference room near the kitchen, lit by buzzing fluorescent lights, its bare walls adorned only by a TV streaming a delayed feed of the main auction. Folding chairs were scattered in uneven rows, half full with forgotten names and low-tier patrons nursing plastic cups of watery wine. I sat down, Elliot beside me sighing softly. "They did the same to me when Jacques died," he muttered. "Not enough room at the memorial. They made space for the press instead." My hands folded in my lap as the screen showed Callista glowing, in her dress, commanding the room as if it belonged to her alone. They'd banished me to this side room to watch my own life be paraded like a commodity. "I know this isn't much," Elliot said, pulling a small unlabeled flash drive from his coat pocket. "But Jacques left this for you. Said if I ever saw you again and you looked like you were about to disappear, I should give it to you." I stared at it, numb, then connected it to my phone. The screen flickered to life with a grainy video, Jacques's tired face illuminated by his studio lamp, voice steady and sure. "If they erase your name, let the work speak," he said. "But don't disappear. Your voice matters more than their walls." He smiled faintly, real. "Art isn't about approval, Raylene. It's about presence. Keep showing up." The video ended. I sat in silence, breathing through the weight of being seen again, even if only through a recording, the only person who ever called me an artist without mockery. Elliot nodded, eyes full of fierce belief. The screen cut to the auctioneer announcing the opening bid for Veil of Dawn. Numbers flashed beneath the auctioneer's voice, too distant, too cold. My feet moved before I could stop them. I stood, slipped out of the room, and walked down the hallway past the kitchen, past the coat check, past the clinking glasses and hushed gasps of the wealthy crowd. Outside, the cold air wrapped around me like an old friend, the wind tugging at the frayed hem of my coat. Across the street, the Gustad building glowed warmly against the snow, golden light spilling from its towering windows. I paused at the edge of the valet line. Around me, people chatted about lot numbers, champagne, and Swiss cheese, oblivious to the true cost behind the masterpiece they were bidding on. I almost walked away. It would have been cleaner, easier. But then my fingers brushed inside my clutch against something I'd forgotten, a folded piece of thick, familiar paper. I pulled it out, my original sketch of Veil of Dawn, the one I had drawn that first desperate night at the shelter. There beneath the jagged charcoal lines was my name, my full name scrawled carefully, Raylene Elner. Jacques must have slipped it in before he died, quiet and deliberate, just like him. I stared at the paper for a long, heavy moment. Then, turned my gaze back to the glowing building across the street, clutching the sketch tight. "Not yet," I whispered to the biting wind. "You don't get to steal my silence." I stepped back inside, the cold from outside still clinging to me. But something inside had shifted. No rush in my steps, no tremor in my spine. Not anger, not revenge. Something sharper, clearer, like sunlight breaking after a long, dark night. I slipped through the corridor, past velvet ropes and murmurs of vintage wines and valuations, and melted into the main viewing room unnoticed. The lights had softened, focusing on the auctioneer, who stood like a maestro, baton poised, voice crisp and commanding as he announced Lot 71, Veil of Dawn. I settled at the back, half hidden behind a column, still clutching the creased sketch. The opening bid was $1 million. The room stirred. Hands shot up, paddles emblazoned with crests and logos. People I'd never met bidding on the painting I had created with trembling hands and stolen moments beneath flickering fluorescent bulbs. A billionaire from Dubai offered $1.3 million. A hedge fund couple pushed higher. A woman in pearls whispered and signaled $1.5 million. The energy buzzed electric. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my paddle. Simple paper, slightly bent, at the corner, assigned to me at the door and ignored all evening. I raised it calmly, deliberately. Before 2 seconds passed, a staffer in a sharp gray blazer hurried over. "Excuse me, miss," he said loud enough to draw eyes. "That paddle isn't registered. You'll need to lower it." Laughter rippled. Nearby, someone snickered. "I'm sorry," I said, still holding it high. "You're not authorized to bid," he repeated, a tight smile curling. "Please lower your paddle or we'll revoke your guest privileges." Slowly, like lowering a blade, I dropped my hand. The auctioneer didn't pause. He called for $2 million. Shame had long since fled me. I turned to the man and said firmly, "I'd like to see the provenance documentation, please." He blinked, stammered, "I don't handle that." Then, maybe sensing something in my tone or eyes, nodded and disappeared briefly. When he returned, he was flanked by a polished young woman clutching a binder, offering a rehearsed smile. "The file includes the artist's background narrative and certificate of authenticity," she said, "though guests aren't usually granted access." "I'm the artist," I said, voice steady. She blinked, hesitated, then handed over the folder. Inside were glossy pages, carefully curated lines about loss and courage, and at the bottom of the certificate, below a reproduction of Veil of Dawn, a signature, but not mine. It was close. Callista's handwriting shaped to mimic mine, with a note beneath. Inspired by the guidance of Callista Quinn. My jaw tightened. Every nerve froze. They hadn't just stolen the work. They'd rewritten it, reassigned my grief to someone else's resume. My brushstrokes, my breakdown, my healing had become a marketing tool for the woman who once told me I should stick to babysitting. I looked up. The bidding had climbed to $2.9 million. Callista stood near the front, smiling like a bride who had skipped the rehearsal. Another paddle rose to $3 million. She turned, waving to a man near the back, a Monaco accent whispering in his nod. A camera flash cracked through the room. Callista posed beneath my painting, her hand lightly touching the frame as if blessing a child. My fingers lost their grip. The paddle hit the floor with a sharp clatter like shattering glass. Heads snapped toward me. 2 rows ahead, a woman leaned in, whispering not so quietly, "Is she still here? God, give it up already. She looks like she came to refill the wine." Laughter flickered around her like dry sparks catching fire. I stayed still, chin raised, hands folded, but inside something snapped. Not rage, but a cold, biting silence with teeth. I inhaled sharply and looked to the stage. The auctioneer called, "Going once, going twice." Callista smiled, queen already crowned. I stood. No words. 1 step forward. Every eye turned. My heels clicked against the marble, slicing through. The murmurs, up the shifting stairs. I didn't flinch, blink, or acknowledge the ripple of whispers following my stride. I walked as if I belonged because deep down, even after everything, I knew I did. My gaze never left Veil of Dawn, its fractured light, aching shadows, the brushstrokes that once bled from my fingers during nights no one in this room dared to imagine. It wasn't just a painting, it was a memory sealed in pigment, and they were trying to sell it like a pretty thing someone else had discovered. At the front, I said nothing, raised no finger, only reached into my clutch and unfolded the paper I'd found earlier, now creased but clear. The original sketch, raw charcoal on cheap artist stock, signed with my full name and date scrawled. On the back, Arcastel Santa Fe Shelter, 2:14 a.m. I placed it gently on the podium beside the auctioneer. He looked puzzled, then intrigued. The room tensed. A gallery assistant leaned in, whispers trickled through a headset. Moments later, the projector lit up the massive white wall behind me with the stark sketch, raw, bruised, unmistakably mine. "You may not know me," I said softly, stepping closer to the mic. My voice didn't falter. "But my work has been standing in this room long before you ever let me in." I didn't face them. I spoke to the canvas, to the echo of myself inside it. Behind me, heels clicked, sharp and fast. Callista's voice broke the silence. "She's lying," gasps. "She's just trying to embarrass us. That sketch could be faked. You don't know her. You don't know what she's like." A man near the projector replied calmly, "Metadata confirms the timestamp. It matches archival submissions logged under the private sketch archive at the Langdon Trust." Callista spun around, desperate. "Mother, tell them. Tell them it was inspired by me, that I helped." But Valora sat still, fingers clasped tightly, eyes fixed on a glass of untouched water. Callista's lips trembled. "You told me to—" She stopped herself. No one came to her defense. The room shifted, heavy with anticipation, and I finally turned to face them. No fury, no speech, just the raw truth lying at my feet and projected on the wall behind me. The auctioneer cleared his throat, voice brittle. "Miss Castell, shall we continue the sale?" I met his gaze, then looked at Callista, her mascara threatening to run, her composure cracking, and my eyes drifted back to the sketch, to the signature, to the timestamp marking the night it was born. "Calm, steady," I said. "No, I didn't. Come here to sell my name. I came to take it back." Silence fell. Thicker, heavier than before. The curiosity in the room dissolved into recognition. Some bowed their heads, others nodded quietly. The auctioneer adjusted his microphone and stepped back, uncertain, as I reached for the sketch on the podium. But before I could gather it, a figure emerged from the crowd, a poised, deliberate presence. Valora glided through the hush, a sealed, manila envelope in hand, plain yet ominous, carrying a twist I already feared. I met her calm eyes, unflinching, ready. The auctioneer froze, unsure whether to acknowledge or call security, but she bypassed me and handed the envelope straight to him. "A matter of clarification," she said, voice smooth as aged bourbon. The auctioneer carefully opened the envelope. Papers rustled like whispered secrets, shifting the room's atmosphere once again. He read aloud, "Notarized deed of ownership for Veil of Dawn, filed under Quinn Holdings LLC. Callista Quinn listed as sole authorized custodian." A wildfire of whispers erupted, phones lifted, cameras flashed. Valora's voice sliced through the murmurs, colder than ice. "My daughter financed the framing, the shipping, the presentation, the handling fees. The painting is ours in every way that matters." Her smile, brittle and hollow, didn't reach her eyes as she turned to me. "You can keep the romance, darling, but art without backing is just a hobby." A voice from the media team muttered, "This just went nuclear." I stood frozen, not shocked but still, like the moment when you realize the storm was never about the wind, but the hand that pushed you into it. Valora tilted her chin. "Call yourself the artist, Raylene, but artists need patrons, and you've never been good at asking for help." I said nothing, not yet. Instead, I reached into my clutch, fingers brushing past the same sketch that had silenced the room minutes ago, and pulled out a folded letter, creased and worn, my mentor's handwriting etched across the front, alongside a small flash drive. Approaching the podium where the auctioneer stood frozen, I said calmly, "This letter was written and signed by Jacques Langdon, my mentor, dated 3 months before Quinn Holdings existed. He verified Veil of Dawn as mine alone. Not inspired by, not co-created, mine." Passing the letter to the auctioneer, I turned toward the press crowd and raised the flash drive. "This contains every sketch, every thumbnail, every voice note, every brush test, time-stamped, all in my name." The cameras clicked furiously now. The media leaned in. I handed the flash drive to a woman from the New York Post and said simply, "Make it public." Gasps swelled into murmurs. Callista rose, furious. "This is slander. She's bitter, jealous, because she never had enough." I didn't shout or plead. I spoke in a clear, cutting voice that sliced through her words like a blade through silk. I painted Veil of Dawn when I was sleeping on floorboards, not for profit, not for applause, but because I needed to breathe, and this was the only way I knew how. I turned to face the crowd, once dismissive, now stunned, and said, "This canvas may legally belong to you, but this work, this story, this pain, this breath, is mine. You can keep the walls, but you will never own what lived inside them." Without waiting for another insult or defense, I turned and walked away, the silence behind me heavier than ever. As I reached the tall glass doors of Gustad, I heard the auctioneer's gavel fall sharply, its crack no longer holding me hostage. Snow fell softly, the cold night air exhaling around me as I descended the marble stairs, each step firmer than the last. My breath curled visibly, but inside me a warmth bloomed. I reached into my coat pocket, not for my phone, ignored all the missed calls and buzzing notifications, but for the silver ring tucked inside my clutch before I entered. Sliding it onto my finger, it felt like coming home, a quiet anchor. From my father, who had given it to me before he died, saying simply, "Paint whatever they say you shouldn't. That's how I'll know it's you." In the days that followed, the world shifted. Not with fanfare or fury, but with precise, silent reckoning. Quinn family scandal broke, auction house came under scrutiny for erasing artists, anonymous sketch shook the industry with truth. Callista's sponsors vanished like a summer storm. Magazine spreads quietly disappeared. Podcast episodes were edited to focus on art, not hype. Valora stepped down from the arts board, not fired, but silenced, with polite thanks and a plaque, while donors stopped returning calls and patrons looked elsewhere. No dramatic headlines, just absence, the cruelest punishment for them all. Months later, I moved to Asheville, drawn by the mountains, opening a modest gallery tucked between a family bakery and violin repair shop. Exposed brick walls, chipped, white trim, no spotlights, no velvet ropes, just daylight, wood floors, and open space. Admission free, paintings unsigned. When asked, volunteers shrugged. Depends on which brushstroke you're looking at. The back of the gallery became a studio where children dipped fingers in paint and elders sketched faces of lost loved ones. On a faded chalkboard in uneven handwriting, I'd written, "The walls never ask if you belong, they just hold whatever you're brave enough to hang." I lived quietly, intentionally, not invisible, just apart. One afternoon, restocking. Brushes. I heard a soft gasp near the entrance. Turning, I saw a woman about 10 years older than when I painted Veil of Dawn, frozen before a display case. Inside lay the original sketch, the same one I laid on the podium that night, with the silver ring resting beside it and a brass plaque mounted below. No dates, no titles, just a sentence from Jacques, long before this all began. To the ID, one who saw color where others saw mess. The woman turned to me, misty-eyed, asking, "Did you write that?" I smiled, shaking my head. "No, but I earned it." She nodded, looking away as if she needed a moment. Later, painting quietly in the back, soft sunlight filtering through the dusty skylight, music playing low from someone's phone, a little girl wandered in, not more than 9, stopped before the canvas, tilted her head and asked, "Who made this?" I smiled, steady and sure. "Someone who used to be silent." She nodded and walked away. I no longer needed them to say my name. My name lived in the breath between every line, the silence between colors, the space art creates, when no one shouts over it. Some silences don't mean surrender. Some silences are brushstrokes waiting to be seen.